Senior Director of Marketing, NCM Fathom, Laura Lear.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. What I'm going to talk about today is content marketing and what content marketing can do, not for just events, but marketing in general, because content is really the engine that makes marketing go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three main areas today, and thank God I have three, Iris, three, not four, three main topics I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to start by talking about the power of storytelling and how it really connects people emotionally to your brand and your company. And then I'm going to talk about, okay, with the storytelling under our belts, how do we go about creating content that's valuable and resonates with our audience? And then finally, I'll talk about some ideas for promoting your content. So I've got my Twitter handle and my email address up here too. So if anybody'd like to reach out at the end of this for any of these slides, I'd be happy to provide them. Feel free to contact me. So let's start with, what is content marketing really? What does that even mean? Well, really what it is, it's the art of selling, not the art of selling, the art of communicating without selling. It's really non-interruption marketing. And the premise behind this is that in the old days, like 2008, we used to create brochures and product sheets and really do sell our product and our service. But today, with buyers really in the driver's seat at this point, they need to get intelligent. And the best way to make them intelligent is to create a relationship with you and establish trust. And a great way to do that is by providing valuable content to people that helps them in their jobs and their role over time. So, and the basic premise is that if you're adding value continually to somebody, that they're eventually going to begin to trust you and maybe reward you with their business or opportunities, or at least referrals. So that's the promise of content marketing. And it does work. I mean, you see some giant companies doing it, companies that were here yesterday and today, like HP, SAP, Cisco, doing a phenomenal job with content marketing and creating value for their clients. But also, really small businesses and one-person shops use content marketing too. And it's so great because it really democratizes small companies. It makes them look large and potentially like thought leaders. So small companies are no longer really at a deficit with content marketing in their arsenal, in their toolkit. So the channels are vast. There's a million ways to develop content, and here's some of them. This was a B2B study that was done by Junta 42, the Business Marketers Association, and the Content Marketing Institute last year. And these are the top channels that marketers said they use content, and they're vast, right? So it can be any one of these things, and what you select is going to really depend on your audience and your business specifically. But here's just a few. And the way that we've used content has changed, as I mentioned before. Now it's more about a sustained relationship over time with your potential buyer. And the reasons for doing content marketing are just as various as anything else. And people will do it to drive traffic to their website, or they'll do it because they want to become a thought leader in their space and drive awareness for their brand or their company. They want to arm the sales team with a whole suite of new tools that the sales team can use throughout the process. And they even want to develop a closer relationship to clients, because clients who like you already are going to like you even more if you're continually providing value through content. And importantly, it gives them the tools and the ammo that the customers can use to help you with their marketing so they become brand ambassadors on your behalf. So let's start with storytelling. So it all starts with a story. And Iris couldn't have set me up any better, because her whole presentation was a story. And it's because stories connect people emotionally to your brand or your product. So it all starts with a story. So I'm going to start with talking about what is the structure of a good story in content, and what does it look like? Stories make people feel and respond. So throughout the centuries, people have been telling stories to talk about ideas and values that spread through generations over time. And there's a really good reason for this. The psychology of a story, for some reason, humans are able to really ingest and recall stories better than any other medium. And so they remember them, and that's why stories have been so successful and used over time. And stories do elicit an emotional response. So if you're reading something or hearing something, you may frown in dismay, you may light up with joy, or you may question something very deeply. And that allows people to connect emotionally and not just rationally with the story that you're trying to tell. So let's talk about story structure. I call it 1.0, because this is what we've all learned in school, right? Basically, a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is Aristotle's model. This is what he's taught us about the structure of a story. So in Act 1, it's the hero. The hero has a desire, right? He wants to achieve something. So he encounters many roadblocks along the way. He gets villains and all kinds of mean people trying to disrupt him. But eventually, he's able to overcome those conflicts and not only achieve what he wants, but he grows as a person and evolves as a person. And that's the basic story structure that we're all familiar with and that we've all been taught. Since Aristotle's time, though, there have been many people who've studied the effect of stories, especially on business. And one of them who I really look up to is Nancy Duarte. And Nancy Duarte is the president of Duarte Design. And what she does is she does training and presentation materials and trains people on how to give great presentations. And so Nancy saw the value of storytelling in businesses. And she said, what is it about the best presentations? Specifically, I'm going to use presentations here. She said, what is it about the very best presentations? Is there something in common? If I were to analyze and look at the very best presentations that have ever been made, would there be a common theme and would the shape be consistent? So what she found was she went and she looked at the best storytellers. She looked at Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech. Then she looked at Steve Jobs' 2007 iPhone launch. And then she even looked at things like the Gettysburg Address and some of the great speeches that President Kennedy has given. And she did find, over years of study, there was a consistent and predictable shape to the best presentations. And here it is. So it all starts with the what is. So you set up the premise, the what is. What is it today? What is this outlook today? What does it look like? The status quo, right? And then you take a look at, well, what could be? And this is in a business environment you're setting up. Here's what today looks like, but here's what it could be with my product or service. And what she found was that the best presentations created the what is and the what could be, and that there was a very large gap between the two. And the larger the gap, the better it's going to be, because you're able to contrast today with the promise of the future. Here's the past, but look at the present. Here's a problem, but look at that problem removed. And you want to make that gap as large as possible. Then, the other thing that she found about the best stories were that the storytellers would traverse. They would go back and forth between the what is and the what could be, the what is and the what could be. And the reason for that is people are highly resistant to change. And Iris talked a little bit about this earlier. In fact, in her example, if you look at that guy, Myers, you saw that he did it. He consistently and over time kind of led people towards the path that he wanted them to get to by talking about the what is and the what could be. And all good stories follow this structure, ending in what would be the new bliss, the promise of what your product or service can do. So it's incredibly important that we follow this structure if we're going to create content that tells the best story. So I'm going to just rip this apart a little bit further and talk about the Steve Jobs example and how it looked and compared to this shape and what he did to get people to believe in the new universe, the new promise of the iPhone. So you can see the shape here. Now the shape is slightly different. Every presenter is different. Every presenter has a certain cadence. Steve Jobs is very different than Martin Luther King. But the basic structure is the same. So what Steve Jobs did is he came out and he said, okay, let's look at the universe today. Here's the cell phone. It's very utilitarian, doesn't do much, it can make a call. He's like, but now, look at the iPhone. Look what the iPhone can do. Not only does it make calls, but it does all of these other things that make you more productive, and it's also really fun, right? Paints the promise of the what could be. And then he goes on, and one of the things he does really well is he marvels. So this guy, remember, he's been planning this product for probably 4 years, well before the time he gets up to present the launch of this new product. So it's really not new to him. But when he talks about it, he treats it like it is new, and he marvels over this thing in front of this audience, basically modeling the way he wants the audience to feel and respond about this product. So again, he traverses. Here's the iPhone. Here's the cell phone that you've been using. Here's the iPhone. And he goes back and forth and traverses and leads people towards the new bliss. So at the end, he basically says, here's the what is, here's the what could be, and now. Let's look at the new bliss with this iPhone. And he gets people to believe, he compels them in this journey towards his end state, which is, if you use the iPhone, you can also be ahead of the curve. You can also lead into the future if you just take this journey with me. And when she looked at the Martin Luther King speech, she found exactly the same thing, that the traversal was very, very important to the telling of the story and getting people to change their behavior. So the basic premise of storytelling underneath us, let's talk about how to create compelling content. Because seriously, it can be daunting. I remember when I started on this journey, I was like, I don't even know where to start. First of all, what do I really do? What are we really good at here at Fathom? But by the way, I back up for just a second because I didn't say what we did. Actually, NCM Fathom is a division of National Cinemedia, and what we do is we put events on in movie theaters nationwide because we're owned by Regal Entertainment Group, AMC, and Cinemark. So we put on not only entertainment events like the Metropolitan Opera, the UFC, and other sporting events and concert events and Broadway events, but we use the same platform for businesses and corporations who want to tell their story in a really dramatic way. So, and that'll matter later when I tell you about some of the examples of my own content journey. So how do you go about creating content? Because it's such a daunting process. Well, there's a couple of ways. And the first is you can define your audience. And many of you you're all in marketing and event marketing. You probably have already done this at least to some degree, where you've looked at who are your buyer types and how do they each differ? Because you may have different kinds of buyer types, and what matters to them may be slightly different. So you need to define your audience and their personas and what really compels them to want to move forward with you, and what are the things that matter most to them. And there's a few ways that you can go about defining your audience and figuring out who these people are. And figuring out what obstacles do they face. So if you know that you have a VP of marketing potentially, but you also have a product manager and IT manager, they're all slightly different. So you've got to figure out, well, what do they care about? What obstacles are they struggling with that they need to figure out? And there's a few ways that you can define some of these obstacles and figure out what they are by persona, and it all starts with listening first. So what are some ways that we can do this? One way is we can interview our customers. So you can go to your customers, look at your very best set of customers and talk to them and say, hey, if you were to start this buying process all over again today, what would you really like to know? What do you wish you had had available when you made this decision that you didn't have, that now you know would have been really valuable in getting you to understand it, but also giving you the tools you need to sell it inside of your own organization? And your customers will tell you, what do they really wish they'd had to make that process go a lot smoother? And then take a look at, well, where are their watering holes? So where does each of these buyer types, where do they go? What do they listen to online? What blogs and resources and social media groups do these people hang out in? And kind of figure out where they're hanging out online and who they're listening to. Because later on, that's going to help you develop the content you need for that specific channel and reach that specific buyer type. Finally, you can look at studying their digital body language. So take a look at where are people visiting on your website? What pages do they frequent the most? Can you identify the path that they take? What's the point of entry, and then where do they go from there? Do they abandon certain pages really quickly and not spend time on them? Because if so, maybe that's not a very meaningful page for them. So you need to create some new pages on your website that does speak to them. So really look at their digital body language and figure out what are they downloading, what do they seem to really like that's resonating on my existing website. And then throughout all this, now you've got a pretty good idea of what you've listened and what you've learned about these people online. So now you're at a position where you can sit down with the sales team and say, hey, this is what I've learned, but what do you hear? What do you wish you had that would make your sales job easier? And that's when it's time that you can build a roadmap. So now what happens is you want to take a look at, you've got your personas in mind, and you want to look at each of them and say, well, what would move them through the awareness phase, into the consideration phase, and finally into the decision-making phase. And you can kind of take a look at some of the content you would need along each of those phases to figure out, what do you need? What are you missing? What can you build? And the awareness phase is the very, very beginning. It's the time when you most want to be very high level, very thought leadership, very industry driven, because you haven't yet developed that trust in that relationship. So you want to add real value to this buyer very early on in the process without a lot of selling, right? And then as you move through, if they get closer and they'll say, you know what, I really do need this service. Now I just got to figure out kind of who I'm going to go after. That's the consideration phase. And at that point, you may start adding a little bit more specific tools to your armor, to your arsenal, where you say, okay, now's the time where I really want to teach this person about my product and maybe even provide a demo. And then finally, in the decision phase, now you're really narrowing in. Now you really want to convince that buyer, look, I'm the best one for this, and here's why. Let me show you some case studies. Why don't you talk to a customer? Let's check out a demo or a free trial. So kind of build a roadmap and identify the pieces of content that would be most valuable to that buyer and throughout the entire process. Now, if you got that roadmap built, take an inventory. So here's where what we did was we took every single bit of content we ever had and we laid it all out on a big table and we took a look at it and we said, okay, so here's all the content that I currently have. Where does it fit in the buying cycle, those 3 phases I talked about earlier? Is this really like super salesy? Does it belong in more in the consideration or the final decision-making phase? Or is it really thought leadership and I can use it really early on to move somebody through the process? And take inventory. And usually what you'll find is most companies really only have 2 to 3 pieces of content that fit into each of those stages. But that's really okay, because at least now you've got the knowledge, you've got the ammo to understand what it is you need to create. So this is another way of looking at it, and I really like this. So I pulled this out. This is Eloqua. Eloqua is a marketing automation system. Some of you may be familiar with it and use it. But they put out this content marketing grid, and this is version 2 of this content marketing grid. And they took a look at what pieces of content generally are best for certain pieces of the buying cycle, and they mapped it into this content grid. And it's really useful. I got it hanging on my wall, kind of to serve as a reminder of things that I could be doing that I'm not doing yet. But the other thing I really like about it is it points out a really key piece in planning content for your marketing, and that is plan for obsolescence. And I love this, and I'm going to use some examples here to show you kind of how you might go about doing this. So as I mentioned, this is version 2. So this just came out, I think, about a month ago or so, and it's getting huge traction in the social media space. But it's version 2. Eloqua actually put version 1 out last year, and it looked a little bit like this. This was their first take on the content marketing grid. And so what they did is they worked with a design company called Just 3, and they looked at this thing, and they were like, you know, it's pretty cool. It definitely adds value. Definitely adds value. So we should put it out there, but they couldn't get their arms around what they didn't like about it. They just weren't sure. They felt some uneasiness that it wasn't perfect. But what they decided to do was, you know, it's still adding value. I'm going to put it out there in the universe, and then I'm going to wait 1 year from today, and I'm going to take a look at what do people tell me that they like and dislike about it. And they paid particular attention to the criticism. So what they learned over the course of that year was that there were a bunch of people online that were saying, gee, you know, it's pretty valuable, but it's awfully busy, and honestly, it's scaring the daylights out of me. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get started in content marketing. Or others said, well, it's pretty good, but there's types of content that are really misrepresented or underrepresented here in this content grid, and here's what I would do to fill in those blanks, right? And then they had one very sage observer said, this is pretty awesome, but where the heck is the buyer in this? I don't see the buyer perspective anywhere, right? So bingo, Eloqua suddenly's got the information that they need to make this thing great. And the reason why I like this is because it points to, don't be afraid. It points to, if it's not perfect, so what? The good thing is that everybody's starting down this path and nobody has all the answers. So they were fearless. They threw it out there in the universe. They didn't wait till it was perfect, which might have taken weeks or months. They derived the value out of it, learned from what they could, and then presented a new piece of content, which is the content grid version 2, which is really dramatically different. If you take a look at it, it's much, much better, especially if you look at them side by side. And one of the things that this whole process did for Eloquent, which I've learned a lot from, is it addressed the top 3 challenges that face marketers when they're looking at how to develop content marketing. And that is producing engaging content, first of all, enough content, and then having enough budget and resources to develop this content. So what they did, the version 1 was engaging enough. It got out there. People really liked it because everybody was trying to figure out how to do this content marketing thing, right? And the other thing it did was give them an opportunity to produce a lot of content. So they were able to take one piece that they'd produced, and then they were able to leverage it throughout time so that they had enough content moving through their pipeline and their buyers. And then finally, they were really able to not reinvent the wheel and kind of leverage something that they'd already invested the time and money in. So they created this version 2 of this infographic. And that taught me a lot. Which I'm going to get to in my example. And the other thing is it's not all about having to create content. The other thing you can do is curate. So if you've got another company or maybe some other thought leaders, you've listened to your personas, you know what they care about at this point, right? So you can go out and say, well, what else is out there that I can leverage, that I can take maybe and say, hey, you know, this is a great piece of content, and this company did a great job talking about it, but here's how it fits into my industry. Here's how it connects to you, my buyer. Here's how you might think of some ways to take this idea and run with it in what you do, Mr. Buyer. So just curate the content and use what people have. And another thing that's great about this is that you can find some great partners. We're actually doing this today. So our take, we really attached to storytelling, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So we went out and we looked at who are the other people that are talking about the psychology of storytelling, and can we partner with them? And we have. We've partnered with different people to create white papers, and we've even done some joint webinars. And it's been great for both parties because it's given us content and a whole new universe to go after. But it's also done the same for our partners, where we've opened up our kimono and said, hey, join our webcast. We're sponsoring with B2B Magazine, but why don't you come on board? Because you've got a lot to say that matters to our buyers. So it's created win-win situations for both companies and made it a whole lot easier to figure out how to get content that matters. So here's a really specific example, but I just thought I'd throw it out there in case it is applicable. Alltop is Guy Kawasaki's site, and what it is it's a content aggregation site. So it doesn't cover all topics, but they're slowly over time, they're getting more and more content that's more topical. So if you've got a topic that's on Alltop, it's a great place to go to get ideas on how you can use other people's content to get it out yourself. So for example, what I did was I searched on event planning on Alltop, and it came up with a wealth of resources and information that are very current. They change this on a daily basis that I can use, especially in social media, right? It's really easy in social media to say, hey, check this out, check this out, check this out. So you might want to check out Alltop and see if there's topics in there that you can leverage for curation purposes. So now really your story's at the starting line, right? So you've thought it through. What really is my story, the what is and the what could be, and how can I traverse over time? And then you've thought about your personas and how each unique persona, what are their specific pain points, and you've listened into them so you kind of know what storylines to develop. So now it's all about promotion. How do you get your story and your content out into the universe so that people can stumble across it and consume it? So next we're going to talk about just a few ways to promote your stuff. The first one, and I will say that I fail miserably at this, and I'm in the process of trying to fix it, is start at home. And what that means is start with your own website. Take a look at your website and which pages are really ripe for certain content that you can plug in so people can stumble across it. And then you can create some banners about your new content and put them up on your homepage so that people are aware of it as they visit your homepage and go download that new content. And if you have a blog, certainly you can do a synopsis of this new content on your company blog and talk to people about the benefits of downloading it. So start at home. And this is one, like I said, we're weak here. This is an area that I'm working on right now to improve our website. And then the second thing is to publish your content as many places as you can. Of course, they've got to be relevant. You don't want to go throw something out that has no meaning, like on a horse racing site or something. But if you can find relevant places, you want to publish your content in as many places as you can. And some things like Foursquare, Twitter are very wide, and others are more narrow, like TechTarget for the technology industry. So look for places to syndicate your content and publish it in as many places as you can, because everybody's different. Everybody consumes content differently. There are some people that are so dependent on Twitter, it's their go-to source for news, and then there's other people who don't use Twitter at all, but they do use LinkedIn groups and they read blogs. So this is an example I'll use on my own. Now, I could have picked a dud. I have some really bad examples where I haven't been so successful, but I decided to pick a good one for today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did to tell the story of Fathom's storytelling journey. So I mentioned earlier the importance of storytelling, right? And when I think of what's a really good place to tell a story, what's the best place to tell a story, I think about campfire, right? I was like, that's the best venue to tell a story in. What's so good about it? And then I said, well, you know, businesses can tell stories too, because storytelling is really not just for campfires anymore. And that's when kind of the light went off. I said, you know, really what we do is we put businesses' stories up on the big screen, which is a really powerful storytelling medium. So maybe there's something that I should be attaching to, and maybe it's storytelling and talking about how businesses can tell stories using the power of the big screen. So I really attached to that, and I said, what can we do to talk about storytelling and help people tell stories for businesses? And that's when the idea of the first white paper came about. So in 2009, we said, okay, we're going to write a white paper, and it's going to be about telling stories to generate revenue. And we're going to talk about some of the how and why of storytelling and produce some case studies about people who have done it really successfully. And that led to version 2 of the white paper, which is this one, Bold Brands Drive Revenue with Storytelling. So we started putting it out there. Now, in the old days, what would have happened is we probably would have written a press release, and maybe I would have been talking about this white paper up here in today's presentation. But luckily, in today's environment, we can act as publishers. And so I was like, we've got free reign here. So we're going to publish this thing everywhere. And we went to Scribed, which is a great website for syndicating content. And we started publishing there, and we saw some really good traction. Got a little bit encouraged. So we said, okay, it's looking pretty good. So now let's promote it in our newsletter and see if we can start promoting it using the social media channels, like on our Facebook page and Twitter. So we started releasing it out to those channels, and we actively started pitching it to blogs that we thought, marketing blogs that we thought where the story would resonate. And we got a little bit more traction. It kind of fueled us a little bit more. So we said, all right, that seems to be working. Why don't we figure out how to do a webinar? We're talking about storytelling and bringing some of our clients into the fold so that they can tell their stories. So we partnered with B2B Magazine, and we did this webinar around storytelling, and we had 511 registrants with 214 viewers. We're pretty psyched. That's pretty good. Pretty psyched. We're like, okay, we're on to something for sure here. And that's when we decided that we would create an infographic which would basically synthesize all of this stuff that we learned over time and also through the feedback that we received online. And we developed this infographic, and that's when things really took off. When we did this infographic, like out of the gate, it started to pick up. And then we syndicated it, and we basically published it everywhere. Anywhere that there was marketing or businesses that needed to really tell a story. And it started to be picked up in places like content marketing blogs. Guy Kawasaki picked it up. He put it up on his All Top site. We had Chris Brogan, who's a really outstanding genius marketer, pick it up. And then we had Mid-Course Correction and Event Profs, and a few other places picked it up. And then it was really cool when we started getting actually end users picking it up that weren't just marketing people, but the CEO of General Mills picked it up and put it on his blog. We were just thrilled as we could be that he picked this thing up and it was starting to really take off. So here's like the results so far, and it goes to the idea of publish everywhere in as many places as you can and get the word out. So far, the infographic has had, actually it's more than this as of today, but it's had 500,000 Twitter views and all kinds of statistics that have really encouraged us to create more content, see what sticks, and publish it everywhere. And it goes back, and again, Iris, I think she must have seen my presentation, or I saw hers, because it's in the power of threes. So Junta 42, if you're interested in content marketing, I highly recommend Junta 42, and the Content Marketing Institute. And it's run by Joe Palizzi, who is just a genius in content marketing and somebody I really follow and have learned a lot from. But he says use the power of threes. For every single piece of content, think of 3 other ways that you can use it. And you'll be assured that you're going to get some traction. So if you've got a white paper, say, okay, how can I turn the white paper now into a podcast and a webinar? And each of these things, think of every piece of content, think of 3 different things that you can do with it, and you're likely to get some traction. In certain cases, you might want to do some promotion that's paid for. So you might want to buy some advertising, online advertising, or even do some paid sponsorships. For example, if you have invested and funded an industry-wide report, that's really high-value stuff, right? So you might want to pay for it to go through the relevant channels and do some pay-per-click advertising to get people to respond to your content. And then you want to arm sales. And this is another thing. This is like the things I've learned. I've learned a whole list of what not to do, as well as what to do. In our excitement of creating content, we went out there and started promoting it everywhere, but we really didn't put it in a place where sales could consume it. Like all of a sudden, we're like, the salespeople don't even know about this. We need to make them aware of it and give them some ideas on how they can use it. So we finally developed an intranet where we've been arming sales and helping them, teaching them what they can do to use this content. In fact, we've gone so far as we write tweets for them and Facebook posts for them so that they can very easily grab what we're doing and go out and spread the good word. And then finally, the other thing that I learned was remember your tracks. Again, in the excitement, you can forget where you publish this stuff. So you want to make sure that you develop a spreadsheet or some kind of way that you say, well, here's where all of the places that it's been published across the universe. Because if you've planned for obsolescence and you create a version 2 or some new information, you want to make sure you go back and so that that information is continually updated across those channels. And then you always come up with the idea, well, do I gate the content or do I not gate the content? Should I require registration or should I not require registration? Not requiring it is going to give you a lot more results. But at the same time, if you're trying to build a list of people you can market to, you're going to lose that opportunity potentially. So there's no magic. I don't think there's any magic answer here. I think it just kind of depends on the content and maybe the value of the content or the perceived value of the content. So this is an example of a campaign that we did. This is going out to our cable programmers. It's called Glory to the Fans. So we decided to gate it because we had a piece of content that was all about how to create epic events for launching a new cable program or doing a finale around a cable program or getting MSOs or operators to pick up your programming. We decided that was pretty high value, so we decided to go ahead and gate it. So one of the key things here, though, is if you do decide to gate it, make sure that that form is really short and sweet. Otherwise, people are going to abandon very quickly, and you're not going to get them to download the content, which was the whole idea, right? Just a side note, on this campaign, we decided to test 2 creatives on this, completely off track here. But one of the list, half of the list, we said we're going to send the women out with their hair dryers ablazing, right? The other half, she had guns. Guess which one won? No, the guns outperformed 2-1. It's hilarious. It just cracks me up because I had a big fight with my sales guy, my VP of sales. He was very worried about the offensiveness of the guns, but it's been outperforming the hairdryer creative like twice. So it's surprising. So if you're creating content, you're going to have people register. Chances are you're probably going to put them on a landing page first, right? And so one of the things that we learned is you get them to the landing page, and that's the point where it's super important to talk about the what's in it for them. They must know what's in it for me. So you want to compel them as much as possible right here. Here's your chance to get them to download. And one of the things that the Content Marketing Institute learned was that probably in like 40% of the cases, people were abandoning content because they thought, well, God, nobody's downloading this. Maybe the content's not very good or it's not resonating. But what they found was that if in 40% of those cases, if the companies just slightly tweak their landing page, either by bolstering the benefits information or moving stylistically certain elements to different places, their downloads went up through the roof. So it's hard to tell. So you don't want to abandon your content, all the stuff that you've created right away. Instead, just tweak your landing page over and over and over again first to be sure, because it may not be the content. It could very well be the landing page. And finally, this is a hard one, track your speed. How do you go about measuring the success of your content? Well, there's probably a million ways to do it, and this is kind of the beginning of this whole new universe of content marketing, so there's no real silver bullet here. But one of the things you can do is at least establish a baseline. Say, okay, I'm going to at least look at these things, and just to pick those things and measure them consistently over time, and you will have some idea of metrics and measurement. And the most common ways of doing this are things like this: the number of content downloads. You can take a look at the number of tweets or the number of times it's been retweeted, which is a really powerful indicator. Or look at the referring links into your website from other publishers and other sites, which, by the way, is great because it's driving search engine optimization. And one other little trick that we decided to do was gauge influence. And this became a way for us to kind of score certain pieces of content. So, for example, I'll use the storytelling example again. We had, my husband has like 200 followers, and he sent it out. I was like, all right, well, that's a +1. I guess I'll score that as a +1 with his 200 followers. But then when we got people like Chris Brogan and Guy Kawasaki retweeting it, and the CEO of General Mills, we're like, okay, they've got 187,000 followers and 373,000 followers, respectively. So we're going to give that person, we're going to score that content a little bit higher based on the influence of the people who are actually sharing it and promoting it for us. And so we gave Chris Brogan, +100 on that, and Guy Kawasaki a +210 with all of his followers and his reach. And the other thing that's great about this, how do you know when something's really working? And it is when people, very influential people, have taken your story that you've taken so much time to develop, and they're telling your story for you. I mean, nothing is better than that. Nothing. It's very fulfilling. So speaking of influencers, I'd like to kind of wrap this up today by sharing with you some of the people who've really inspired me and given me the tools to go down my own content marketing journey. And these are some of the people that I mentioned earlier. And if you're really interested in content marketing, I highly encourage you to watch what they're doing, because they're great examples of what you can be doing to influence people as you move through your content journey. So this is the finish line. This is it for today. So we talked about the power of storytelling and how it can connect people emotionally and rationally to your brand or your product. And we talked about some ideas for listening into people, listening into your personas to figure out, well, what kind of content can you create for them, and how do you map that across that buying cycle, that customer journey. And then finally, we talked about some ideas for promoting your content and getting it out into the universe. So that's it. And this is me. This is my one and only 5K that I've ever run. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'm going to race you to the bar. So any questions today? Or does anybody have any stories that they can share on things that have worked for them? I can't see, so. Okay, so I think the question was, for event marketing specifically, are there ways that you can use content to promote events, or do you kind of hold on to that content because that you really want to premiere it at the event? And I think it all depends. What I've seen done successfully is I've seen people very successfully do a teaser campaign that talks about, here's what you're going to get out of the event, here's the experience that this speaker has, here's what you're going to learn, and here specifically are some key takeaways that you're going to get out of the event if you come to it. And then I've also seen people do like a contest, pre-event contest in social media to get ideas around content. And this is very useful if you want to fill in the blanks. If you want to know the mindset of your audience before your event, it's a great way to kind of figure out, what are people thinking and feeling? What questions do they have that we can ask at this event to make sure that we're doing it appropriately? And then when you get to the event, you want to definitely have hashtags. So of course you want to do social media stuff and make sure you have a hashtag set up for that event so that people are continually talking about it and tweeting it in real time during the event. And then the other thing that I've seen, because it used to be, at least my own experience, is because of what I do, because we do big screen events, a lot of people said, well, that competes with webinars, so God forbid, we don't want to do any webinars. Don't do any webinars, Laura, because that's our competition. Well, I don't think it is, A. In fact, I completely disagree. And so what we actually do now is when we do events, we've tried to teach our clients that they are not in competition, that you can do a lot of teaser information to get people to your big screen event, which is one night. You could do a huge launch, and then what you can do is then you have an opportunity to engage those people after with more specific, detailed content that drives them into your next webinar, which might be very topical or very specific around a certain topic. So you can really, I think, extend the life of your event marketing if you do it in a way that's like a 360-degree way, before the event, during the event, and after the event. So I think there's a lot of value to that. And in fact, this presentation, I built this specifically for this event, but now I'm like, I'm definitely going to reuse this and figure out a way to do a webinar and a podcast and a white paper and all of it. So I think there are ways to certainly extend that experience for event marketing purposes. Are there any other questions? Or does anybody have an experience they'd like to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that the concept of storytelling to have more effective content, I think, is also really important internally as well. So when telling the story to management about how marketing contributes to the bottom line, using those same techniques will help you guys get more budget.
That's a really good point. You're right. I mean, through that whole thing, the what is and the what could be, painting that picture. Of course, some of it might have to be, getting people to imagine is so important, and including, you're right, internally telling the story of what this is, and oftentimes your sales team needs just as much storytelling and belief, right? You need to bolster their own belief system so that they have the confidence to go out and actually sell what you do. So if they believe your story and they can internalize it and tell it well, and your CEO, then you've hit a home run. Help them out. Help them believe. Are there any other questions?
You just expound on the value, and we've found this to be huge, to have other people tell your story. Okay?
I think, yeah. I think what happens is when other people tell your story, your credibility goes through the roof, right? Because nobody can, your clients in particular, right? If you can get your clients and your customers getting a hold of that story and proliferating it on your behalf, or you can get major thought influencers or leaders in the space that you're in to tell your story on your behalf, there's nothing more powerful than that. And it's funny, though, because you do have to sell it. Because, for example, our VP of sales was often not understanding, well, why are you putting out a white paper on storytelling? You're not even talking about what Fathom does. But what happens? What happens in that scenario, right, is that you're feeding people and they're starting to pick up content that you've developed, and suddenly your name is out there. Especially when you're dealing with like a smaller or mid-sized company, right? They have no other way. Like when people started talking about Fathom, all of a sudden, that was like liquid gold to us, because people were like trying to, at least searching on us and going to figure out who we were. Why on earth was Guy Kawasaki and Chris Brogan talking about Fathom? Who the heck are they? So that's when the value to the sales team became a little bit clearer. Yeah, well, you're right. We're not selling. We're not telling people exactly what it is that we do and trying to sell them, but our name is getting out there in a way that we could not have possibly afforded. We're not big enough. Our budgets aren't big enough for us to put a lot of money in brand awareness. And this is one of the ways that we address that, was by getting people to tell our story for us. Any others? We're winding down. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and an honor. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.